As many of you already know, I have felt strongly about improving supervisory training across the federal government for some time, and I'm thrilled that we're going to have a chance to talk about that in length today. I think it's also important, however, to make note about the administration's proposed FY19 budget and the grave impact it would have on federal employees if it were implemented, and consequently the grave impact it would have on recruitment of federal employees. The proposed threats to federal employees in the budget are numerous, from pay to retirement to health care and student loan forgiveness benefits to collective bargaining and due process rights. There are proposals that treat federal employees, I think, in a way that's less than fair. Federal employees are absolutely a critical part of the federal government, and they make North Dakota and our country a better place to live every single day. In fact, I was just with one of our ranchers who was talking about the failure to have scientists out on the grasslands and the rangelands has really slowed down a lot of innovation in terms of management. And I asked him, is that because of USDA not being fully staffed? He said it's a real problem in western North Dakota. And so it's really interesting to hear, people that you would think are maybe more conservative who would otherwise be very critical of, as people would expect federal employees, recognizing that we need to have these folks in these roles so that they can get their job done. So I look forward to diving into this critical problem, but I think we can't talk about our lack of success in recruiting millennials, and I know I get in trouble when I talk about age, but recruiting new employees into the federal system without looking at how we're treating current employees. And whether, like any other recruitment tool, the best recruitment we have are people who are always sitting in those desks who say, you ought to do this, it's really interesting work. I'm treated really well at work, I'm respected at work, and when you don't have an army of people out there recruiting because they don't feel valued at work, they don't feel like there's a future, we're going to have more and more problems with recruitment. And so it's really important that we talk about supervisory training so we improve the morale of the people who are there, but that we also talk about the broader public policy issues relative to how we're treating federal employees today and how that's going to affect our recruitment for tomorrow. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to this hearing. Thanks so much. Stronger supervisory training is something that I've advocated for since coming on this committee, and I'm pleased that Senator Langford is working with our office and working with me to try and design a bipartisan bill that we can advance to looking at supervisory training. And so I'm just going to spend some time here visiting with you all about how the system currently grades and trains and works with supervisors. And rather than kind of getting into the proficiencies in the substantive area, which I think frequently supervisors have great proficiency. That's why they end up being supervisors. Problem is that they don't have the soft skills that they need to inspire teams, to inspire the workforce to come together and achieve results. So when you look at the 2017 study that Deloitte did with the Senior Executive Association, I was struck by their evaluation that only 35% of career senior executives that responded felt that career senior leaders were selected because of their ability to inspire teams. I'm wondering how these soft skills, these kind of interpersonal skills that are hard to quantify in a multiple choice test, how do you evaluate those soft skills? How do you evaluate a supervisor's ability to inspire teams and achieve results and create a positive workforce with high morale? And so maybe we can start with you, Angela. We know that DHS has over the years gotten beat up pretty bad for low morale. And I know how hard you've been working. We're grateful that you've taken on this challenge, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get another chance here. But I'm wondering, when you look at supervisory training and you look at supervisory evaluation, how do you deal with this intangible that I'm talking about?
I think that's a great question. And it's almost like the age of time that we've been dealing with this, right? And over the course of the years, I think it's absolutely true that what we've done is we've promoted folks based on their technical skills. And I think we've put this whole idea of soft skills as being something on a side burner. But it really has come to light. And I think within DHS, with our FEVs, and looking at this and really examining it, we really said to ourselves, look, I think one of the things we really need to focus in on is these particular skills. And so one of the things that we did, we started listening tours, and it started with Secretary Kelly, and then Deputy Secretary Duke, and then our current secretary as well, myself, our Deputy Undersecretary for Management, you name it. We go out and we actually hold listening tours.
With who?
Not only with the employees, but with the supervisors as well. And to really sit down and understand at the ground level, what is it that they're really dealing with? What are the struggles that they're having? How can we help them and prepare them to be able to deal with some of the things that they're facing on a daily basis? Because I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, I think I'm going to go in and just be a real jerk to my employees. I think instead they're struggling to be both the supervisor that we want them to be, and then also try to carry out their technical responsibilities at the same time. And so this year of leadership that we've created, I think, is an excellent opportunity. We're not only giving them the skills that help them be able to understand how to recruit better, understanding our hiring authorities, understanding how to have a difficult conversation, understanding how to take those actions that ultimately at the end of the day they may have to take that's pretty darn tough. But then we also intersperse that with is actual leadership development as well. Just next week, in fact, we're having a Women in Leadership panel where I serve on the panel along with some other folks to really have a conversation with not only our supervisors, but our employees as well, with regard to what it's like to be, a woman in a leadership position. What are some of the things that we bring to the table that might be different from our male counterparts, and how do we, in essence, lead from where we are, regardless of whether we're got the supervisor moniker or not? And so we've also introduced some things that are kind of non-traditional. Just this week, in fact, we pulled all of our SES within management, so it was over 60 of us, into Henry V. Conversation around Henry V and what he went through with regard to inspiring his troops and how to go ahead and get England to be able to win a battle within France. And you may say, well, what the heck does that have to do with really employee engagement? But to a person, every SES walked out of there and said, I just learned something. I learned something about myself. I learned something about what I gravitate to. I learned something about how to inspire folks, to get them to actually be motivated and want to do the job that we need them to do.
So how do you, Angela, though, doing all those things and getting people to think differently about their role as not just supervisors, but leaders.
Right.
How do you then evaluate that? How do you, I think a lot of times that people see it coming, okay, now I get it, and then slide back to what is familiar.
Right, exactly. So one of the things we've started to do is the FEVS is great, but it's a once-a-year annual survey. By the time we get it, it's almost time to take it all over again. So we started doing pulse surveys where we actually send out to the groups, and just a few questions. We don't make it burdensome on them, but we send out these little pulse surveys to say, hey, we had this kind of training. Did it really have an impact? Did you notice that the communications actually improved? Did you notice that your supervisor seemed to be a little bit more interested in how your day was going and not just simply telling you where to head for the next shift? And then we use that to evaluate whether or not that kind of training or that kind of educational experience was really even having the impact that we wanted to. So we don't want to get stuck on just doing something for the sake, because that's how it's always been done. Instead, I think what we're doing is seeing this as being very fluid. Nothing's etched in stone. If it didn't work, then we'll try something different.
Well, I'm curious because as we look at supervisory training and this challenge that we have between the tangible and the intangible, and I really see a lot of these traits as intangible, kind of difficult to apply baseline metrics, but you know it when you see it, kind of thing.
Right.
What advice can you give to us in terms of our supervisory role, our oversight role on building better leadership and better supervision?
You know, sometimes it's like we struggle between this line of legislating behavior, right, versus like how do we ensure that we have the kinds of resources that we need dedicated, quite frankly, to these kinds of programs. Sometimes what happens, I think, is that when cuts need to come, you know, for resourcing and stuff, one of the first things that we have a tendency to cut would be training programs. At least that's been my experience throughout my entire career. And I think the military, you know, often says that you train the way you fight and you fight the way you train. And I think that we in the civilian agencies need to have that same kind of mindset where training is something that is absolutely seen as a crucial part of what we do.
Yeah, I don't think you can have culture change without training.
Correct.
I think that's the lesson from the military, that
Exactly.
when you train together and when you train with a common purpose, you achieve culture change within organizations. And I think in many cases, as we look at the challenges going forward, that culture change, especially at DHS, number one, we need to appreciate them more for what they do. But I think that you've got a big job. That has been ignored for 15 years. I know you're celebrating 15 years of the agency. We're talking about authorization for DHS.
Right.
Very difficult to get kind of a sense of prioritization from Congress when you have 100 committees telling you what to do and coming at you and mostly critical. And so, I mean, I think we don't want to just bring out the stick. We want to know what that carrot is, and we want to work with Angela. But I think you're kind of a case study for me in supervisory training, and that's why I think it's interesting what you're doing.